Morning, everyone. Jim D'Antoni from Dish Media, Director of National Sales. Real quick, that's both Dish TV on the satellite front and Sling TV on the OTT front. And we offer advanced TV opportunities for marketers out there in the landscape. And most notably, that's national addressable advertising. We're a pioneer in that spirit, in that space. We definitely formed our own unique expertise in that. And when we sell addressable, we typically sell it across Dish and Sling. So looking forward to today. This is actually, I've been doing Brand Innovators conferences for about 3 or 4 years. This is the first one I've done live since CES 2020. So thrilled to be back in a live environment. It's great in person. I want to also, once again, applaud Brand Innovators for really leading the charge out there to bringing media marketing individuals back collaborating, which I think is terrific. But enough about me. I'm thrilled to be joined by Scott today. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we're going to cover a number of subjects. We're going to get into all things streaming, of course. We'll talk upfronts. We'll talk things, the nuances of ad load and paid content versus free content. We're going to get some really good insights from Scott. He has a long, prestigious career, which includes it's 20 years. We're not dating you there.
Since I was 8, that's all right.
And that's both agency side as well as client side. So really looking forward to the conversation. But why don't we jump in? Why don't we start with the team you lead? You can break that down and the properties that you represent.
Sure. So hello, I'm Scott. Kind of weird to be the only unmasked person in the room. I feel like the governor.
Tippy waitresses.
What we're saying. So first of all, last time go Rams. Last panel, wrong city. So I'm Scott. I've been in media for, like Jim said, about 20 years, primarily entertainment. I'm currently at YouTube, working on the media team across all of our YouTube products. So that includes YouTube, obviously, our main app. I've got YouTube TV, our live streaming service, YouTube Shorts, which we launched last year, which is a vertical video like TikTok and Snapchat and that sort of thing, and then a host of other YouTube products like YouTube Premium. Very separate from Google in a lot of ways, but obviously we're all one company and work really closely with those guys. And yeah, I mean, been doing a lot in the entertainment space before that. I was at Fox for several years before Disney bought them. And Disney for a little bit. I've worked on the agency side for most of my career as well on brands such as PlayStation, Stars, and Activision, including when I was at Activision, my clients were some of the folks that you guys saw yesterday. Other than the NFL, Matt Tim, Dave Bolger, and Ian. So the world's come full circle.
Terrific. Well, you've been in YouTube for call it 4 or 5 months. Is there anything that stands out in the streaming space? I know you probably use YouTube as a vehicle when you're in the other jobs, but anything stand out?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think first of all, the obviously everyone's on YouTube, right? It's a massive platform, but the breadth of audience doesn't actually take away from the individual experiences that people have. In the way that I've got 2 kids, 16 and 14. The way that a 14-year-old girl interacts with YouTube is very different than the way slightly older father looks at YouTube, and I think that's something in the last panel I talked a little bit about consumers and authenticity and that's important to us, but it's interesting for us as a brand that it's coming from our people that are producing videos and content, right? Brandon made the joke before that he's a YouTuber now to the younger generation, but that's what I love to hear. That's what we love to hear because our brand story is being told by Brandon and everyone like him who are producing content and expressing themselves on the platform. And so I think that's been the interesting thing for me, right? I come from a world before YouTube where I was always working on movies and streaming service content. And so the brand may be represented in some way by an actor or director, but that person's already most likely famous in the public eye. For us, we're now dealing with our brand being told, that story being told by people that none of us in this room probably know. For every Brandon Marshall, there's 100 other people that most people don't know, and they're out there expressing themselves. And so it's been kind of interesting for me to change that mindset of how do you talk to consumers using that mouthpiece of people that they're not familiar with versus, what actor can I put in my commercial today?
Yeah, that's great. The other thing you talked about was what is quality content when we were prepping. it's not up to you to determine what's quality content. A lot of times that's in the beholder or the user.
Yeah, so actually last week, a former client of mine asked me to speak. He teaches at Anderson, the UCLA school, and he asked me to speak. And I found this chart. It was the top 100 television telecasts of 2021, any, not just prime time, anytime. Over 80 of them were football telecasts. There was only one scripted drama, or the way us older folks think of TV, and that was the show that CBS premiered coming out of the Super Bowl. So it doesn't really count. You find that same chart from 20, 30 years ago. It's all scripted shows. It's Friends, it's Seinfeld, it's ER, it's that kind of stuff. And so what I think it speaks to is that idea of, I think sometimes in marketing, especially those of us doing this for a long time, we tend to over-index on premium content being something you find on an NBC or CBS, or something professionally produced or starring someone you know. But again, anyone out here that has kids or works in a space where they work with kids all the time, they know that premium content to that generation is not that, right? It's your favorite gamer streaming on Twitch. It's your, the podcast. It's the YouTube. It's the TikTok, the self-expression, whether it's watched by 2 people or 2 million people. So that's been an interesting change for us as marketers, right? We used to be, the company you keep, where you put your message, where you put your advertisement, your commercial is really, really important. And I think today it's still true. It's still important, but what that is, that halo effect you get can come from anything and come from anybody. And it makes it a challenge. I cringe, quite frankly, when I'm sitting in a room and someone said, well, are we in front of premium content? Like, to who? To you, to your kids, and I think that's something that we, at YouTube, obviously, we know well, we embody it well because our content is premium, whoever's watching it. But, even as marketers, sometimes we forget that. And I think as we get to talk about streaming a little bit more, it's really, I think, changing the equation for what that is.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I was pissed off at one of my boys were playing way too much video games. So he got off the video games. He was forced off of that. So I went upstairs, I went and checked back with him on his phone. He's watching YouTube, watching another player play video games. And I flipped out. Then I started to think about it a little bit, like, it's his passion point. That's one of his heroes. If that was Lawrence Taylor for me, I'm dating myself on that one. But because I use YouTube every day. Sometimes it's just to go back to watch some of my heroes. Sometimes it's about I need to change my snowblower. And change the oil. It's sometimes the utility. So it does. There's so many windows in that, but it wasn't up to me about what was quality. It was up to what my son was passionate about. So it's very true. So the other thing we talked about was free content versus paid content. Love to hear your thoughts on some of that. And then what are some of the expectations from viewers in terms of ad load?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think there's the idea of free content versus, advertising supported, or subscription service. There's a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, certainly from a marketing standpoint, we can talk about that in a second, but I think there's also some ethical questions that come up in the terms of, look, not everyone in our country or in this world can afford a Netflix subscription and an HBO Max subscription and a Disney Plus subscription. And so I feel like we're at a time now where more than ever, we're sort of almost self-selecting who gets to see what content. And there's some dangers there. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time because that's a separate conversation, but I think as marketers, we have to think about that too. It is our responsibility, I believe, to put our ads and support places that are offering customers something of value, right? And obviously it gets in a whole separate conversation of brand safety and supporting certain types of speech. And again, that's a separate conversation. But just at a base level, like the beauty, I think, of streaming and of content these days is there's so many more people that can create it, that can put it out there. You're getting to see so many new voices. It's great. I think we as marketers have a little bit of an obligation to promote that. Obviously the Netflix of the world, we can't get involved. That's fine, but that's something that especially for the streaming platforms that have choice, so the HBO Max or a Peacock, where you can choose to pay, you can choose to not, or different levels. Us advertisers have to understand what's the value of that. Why is someone choosing to not pay to watch commercials? Is it a financial decision? Is it they like ads? Probably not, but maybe. Is it they want to see certain content? And I think we have to think about that more in terms of the type of creative we're doing, where we're placing our ads. Again, it's a responsibility in a lot of ways. But I also think it goes back to the consumer and the choice they have. And that, for me, as a marketer, makes me excited. For the first time in a world where engagement and attention with our ads is so important, if someone is actively understanding that value exchange, and I think about Facebook, right? We all have friends, I'm sure, that hate the advertising on Facebook. I wish I get rid of it. I wish it is whatever. And I always remind people, if I had told you 20 years ago that there was going to be a website that existed where you could talk to anyone you've ever met in your life and people you haven't met, share your pictures, your photos, your life moments, your food you had last night for dinner, and it was all going to be free. Just see an ad together. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to click on it. You can scroll past it, but it's there. I have to think 20 years ago, nobody would have batted an eye at that, right? That's amazing. Here we are 20, and that's just normal technology for us. So that value exchange with consumers is not as strong. And I think we in our industry have to do a better job of reminding people of that. Not in a negative way, like, look what I'm giving you, but like, there's all this you're getting. Like, let us get better about advertising to make that value come out a little bit more.
Nice. Our conference is entertainment marketing and cultural relevance. So what is it like? Compare more, making YouTube and entertainment culturally relevant versus someone like a soft drink or, something in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I used to talk about this a lot when I worked in entertainment, right? It's very easy to get someone to watch a movie trailer on YouTube or TikTok or whatever versus an ad for, call it any brand might be here, but outside the entertainment category. So we had a little bit of benefit there. So now that I'm at YouTube, again, we're certainly closer to the entertainment world than we might be to a laundry detergent or something like that. But there still is that element of, how do you get people to recognize your place in culture? How do you get people to recognize that they have a desire to see your ads, to see your content, that sort of thing? And I think a couple of things that we think about in that space, it goes back to what I was talking earlier, is what's the brand voice, that's coming from, right? When is it a time for us to put an advertisement in front of someone that is YouTube, and when is the time for us to do something that's more about a creator or a product benefit or things like that? I think we talk a lot about brand love or joyful brand. I use my daughter as an example. When I ask her, when you have an hour to kill between homework or whatever it is, like, what brings you joy? What are the places you're going? And she's going to say TikTok. She's going to say Instagram, right? How do we get YouTube in that conversation? It's in that conversation for many, many people. It's certainly been around a lot longer with brands, but that's a constant thought for us. Is how do we keep ourselves in that conversation of not just a utility, right? Everyone go to YouTube and get help with their homework, or how do I change a flat tire? But we want to also be part of that self-expression. We started it, quite frankly. The influencer, whatever you may think about influencer, the world of influencers, YouTube started that. And I think now, obviously, you see it more on Snap and TikTok and all over the place, but we're still such a huge part of that. And I think that's something that brings a lot of people joy, brings a lot of people that cultural relevance. And so we want to stay in that world. And it's hard because, again, the way that I use YouTube, the way that you use YouTube is very different. And so you constantly have to sort of segment out as much as you can, but at the same time, keep it broad because it is everybody.
Sure. No, that's great insight. How about YouTube TV? That's, competitors Sling, YouTube TV, Hulu TV. That's it's been around for 4 or 5 years, and how things going with that? You market that decisively different than YouTube proper?
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a different audience. I think with any streaming service these days, you have to think about who your viewing audience is, who your paying audience is. They should be the same, but I'm sure everyone's got a password or two that they've lent out every now and then. Hopefully not on YouTube TV. So yeah, there's an element for us of there's a difference there, right? It's a little bit older and things like that. I think the bigger question for us, and I imagine you guys at Sling and everyone in the space, is what is, again, that value, right? I think we started, and I'm not even talking YouTube specifically, but this whole world of cord cutting started with this idea of saving money. I don't really think that's true anymore. I have YouTube TV. I've had it for years before I worked there. It's certainly cheaper than my previous unnamed cable satellite company.
The unbundled bundle is starting to bundle.
Yeah, right. And then you start adding everything up. So I think that's changed a little bit. I think now it's more about choice, whether that's cloud-based DVR or whether that's, the ability to watch wherever you pause the TV at home and hop in the car, get the iPad, things like that. So I think that's been a big change. And then again, always goes back to that value exchange, what the customer wants. But it's a huge piece of our business, right? It's interesting because it's the one piece of YouTube that's not, or user-generated content, influencer content. It's the same thing you see on Sling or Dish or anything like that. But it's been a big push. I think the one thing that we struggle with, and everyone struggles with, is when the fights become public. Disney's taking their content off YouTube TV, or Dish is pulling NBC off, and then customers don't get that. Or for those of us who live in LA, how many times have you had someone go, "Oh, you work in advertising? Why don't I get the Dodgers?" Right? Not my decision, but so I think there's a little bit of that. We've got to change the narrative, but it's the future. I mean, I think even anyone that works at a Spectrum or a Charter will tell you that 20 years from now, 10 years from now, we're not going to be talking about cable the way we talk about it now. And from an advertising standpoint, obviously what you guys do so well is the ability to get more segmented and targeted, right? That's the beauty of it for us as YouTube, someone that sells ads, but also as a marketer. Like, I no longer have to say, I'm going to go buy CSI and just accept the waste that comes with half that audience. Like, I can now go out and be a lot more pinpoint targeted. So that to us is the future. And I imagine it's you guys too. And it's why I think that, we'll continue to sort of push in that direction.
Great. That's terrific. So let's pivot a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the broadcast up front. You've been involved with many. I have been involved with many. And that's where a lot of sports marketing, inventory is sold, particularly NFL and college football, which is a massive part of the GRP out there in the landscape. So do you see the upfront, not in specific to sports, but just the exchange, that supply-demand dynamics changed drastically over the last decade? Certainly it's changed even more, in an accelerated rate in the last 2 years. Give me some insights, just, not necessarily YouTube, but just broadly, just as a marketer, about the upfronts, and there's pros and cons, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it's becoming harder and harder to find the pros in the upfront. And that's not a knock on television. I don't want to mistake, as someone that does a lot of digital advertising, still believe in TV. YouTube runs on TV and whatnot. But the mechanism that we sell it and we buy it seems to have broken. If the first question I get from my friends and family is, why can't I get the Dodgers? The second one's always, I don't understand. TV advertising is more expensive, but less people are watching. Like, how does that work? And I'm like, well, you remember Econ 101, and you go down that rabbit hole. But I just find it weird that in an industry where everything changes on a dime, we're still buying our television 18 months in advance, and not only are we doing it, but we're smiling sort of and accepting it and then keep going with it. And it's odd to me because if I'm a television advertiser or seller, knowing the business is changing so much, I would think I'd want to be out in front of something I can change, right? I don't know that I can change consumer habits right away. I don't know if I can change the cost of content, but I certainly can change the way that I transact in my business. So I find it kind of odd, and again, I get it from both sides. There's some certainties, some cost certainties, some benefits like that. But I think we've spent the last 20 years or so developing a really good model in the digital space, how to buy and sell, how to use auction-based media. Not perfect for everybody. And again, I'm sure as a seller, you would love to know 18 months in advance exactly what you're going to have. But there's cancellation clauses. Like, nothing's set in stone. And so I think that for us as marketers, no matter how big a brand you are, or small brand you are, it's about finding what's the benefit, right? We talk value exchange for consumer. What's the value exchange for us? And if going into upfront and getting certain cost certainty and getting certain marketing elements and getting all those bells and whistles you get is important to the way you run your business, then sure. But I don't know that as just a blanket industry, that's the best way to do it. And for me, I feel like with the growth of addressable television and all this targetability, it seems like that's the future anyway. Like, who can get there first? Who can move us there first? So I say this all the time. I don't expect the upfront in its current incarnation to be around in 10 years. Definitely 5 years, we'll see. But I actually think the TV industry can be even bigger because of that, because they'll now be able to react in real time with all these companies, and obviously the measurement, being able to know what's working, right? The famous, I know half my advertising is working, I just don't know what half. Like, well, that's kind of what measurement data was supposed to be about. And I would argue that right now, I feel like it's almost 75%. We don't know what's going on. And I think TV is so poised to be able to do a better job there. We just have to kind of break some of the old habits of how we transact with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you saw 2020 kind of break apart, and no one of the procrastinations at the time. Upfront's over, everyone went right back, overinvested. Now they're taking options out there. But I think it'll kick around for a year or two and right itself. I agree with you. You gonna say something?
No, I was just gonna say 100%, and it was interesting to me. This is the first year I wasn't at YouTube at the time, but when the upfront was starting this year, the first time I've heard multiple people, in the agency world that I was in, practically begging their clients, to make that change, that mindset shift. And I think there's a little bit in our industry of that. Well, everyone else will do it, right? Like I'm a big advertiser. I don't have to do it. I would also do moves there. And it's, without being, monopolistic or collusion, like if we all just kind of do it together, we'll get there. But I think there's a fear of that unknown, in that sort of client brand agency sales world of codependency. There's a fear of breaking that and how we all work together.
Yeah, the legacy, I'm going to be on the outside looking in kind of thing. Terrific. Thanks, that. We got 1 minute. Just want to quickly ask you about the Super Bowl. Well, we know your allegiance.
I almost wore the Rams jersey, but I didn't know.
I thought you were going to rock the jersey.
I was. I did.
But just in terms of Super Bowl, yesterday was, a bunch of very powerful advertisers talking about how they're going to roll out. But there's pros and cons to it. There's ways to work with it. There's ways to work, around it. Just love to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we don't have time for this full conversation, but if you ever want my TED talk on the future of intention and engagement, which has to be the currency we move towards as marketers, you can't beat the Super Bowl, right? It's the only time that people are actively watching the commercials, sometimes more than the game. So that intention and engagement is unprecedented. I think it's really interesting, and I know we don't have time, but I'm fascinated by the decision-making process that goes into when and how you release a Super Bowl commercial. Like 10 years ago, you never saw a single commercial for the game. And now I don't think there's anything left. There's no surprises left. Look, you invested in the game, so I don't care. But if the Rams were in it, I would care more. And so to me, that's what the Super Bowl does, right? It's not about the Super Bowl. It's not about the numbers, the viewership, or certainly the price point. It's about attention, which is so difficult to get in TV, in digital, really everywhere. And so I think that's where the benefit comes. It's not right for every brand. It's, the cost is what it is, and you have to really deliver because that attention you pay it. And I think, again, to me, everything comes back to that attention. There's nothing better than Super Bowl.
Terrific.